Okay, so both of our speakers today come to us from the Jewish Genealogical Society of Greater Boston, JGSGB for short. Jessie Klein is co-president of the JGSGB and a co-director of its Introduction to Jewish Genealogy course. She has also contributed to Mass Poha, the journal of the JGSGB. Jessie is researching ancestors in Poland and the Austria-Hungary Empire. Jay Sage is a retired solid-state physicist. In 1996, after his mother died and his father was too sick to tell him anything, he became interested in genealogy as a way to reconstruct and reconnect with his Jewish family heritage. He immediately became active in the JGSGB and has served on its board ever since. Together with his wife, he was its co-president from 2000 to 2003 and is currently co-editor of its journal. He has lectured at local societies and at regional and international conferences on reunion planning, the use of Google Earth to visualize family history, genealogy software, and DNA testing. So I'm really glad to have both Jessie and Jay here with us today. I'm going to turn it over to them.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Well, thank you for inviting us. I will be speaking on organizing your paper files and your digital files. And then Jay will be speaking on online trees and using a genealogy software program. So let me begin. Okay, so for my part, I'm going to talk a little bit about the benefits of organizing and how to organize your paper files using either folders or binders, and then move on to organizing digital files and using spreadsheets or tables to help you organize your research plan or some of the data that you find. Okay, so why organize our paper files? We probably have seen pictures like this. Some people like to work in this kind of controlled chaos. Some people cannot. I personally, sometimes my work area gets to look a little bit like this, and then I just have to stop and clean it up. I especially like this picture of their computer screen, since you can't even see the entire screen. So what's the benefit of not working like this, but having a system for filing your paper files? Number one, it would be a lot easier to find specific papers. Many of us have probably written ideas down on a scrap of paper and then it gets lost in a pile and you can't find it, or some research data that you can't find. That saves time because you're not duplicating what you've already done. Might prevent you from purchasing a record twice if you don't remember that you already had it. Organization systems will also help you identify work to be done, evaluate your work, and look for discrepancies. And if you're organized, it's going to be easier to share the information, whether you're sharing it with family now or just at some point when you leave it for your descendants. It'll be a lot easier for them to figure out what you've done. There's no right or wrong system for organizing your files. The important thing is coming up with a system that's going to work for you. The system should be simple so that it's something that you will use and that someone else can figure it out. But in all the webinars on this topic that I've listened to, everybody starts out by saying, you've got to pick a system that works for you. So there's no right or wrong system. Okay, so in case there are some new genealogists with us today, what are some of the papers or artifacts that we have? Things like census records, immigration records, the military records. You may have them as paper, you may have them as computer files, vital records, deeds, correspondence. I have letters that my grandfather wrote back to my grandmother and my mother in 1929 when he was sailing back to Poland for a family reunion. You may have diaries. You may have translations. If your family did not come from an English-speaking country, you may have been able to get some vital records in another language that you've had translated. We all probably have Post-it notes and pieces of paper that we accumulate with research ideas. So what do we do with those? And then, of course, newspaper articles, either you cut them out, or for more recent ones, or you may have them digitally. And then reference materials. If you go to a library, you might copy something out from a reference, Xerox from a reference book in the library. It is recommended that copies should go in folders and binders, but your originals should go into archival storage. And I will address a little bit about archival storage in a few slides. Okay, so for paper files, one system to use is folders. And we've got your usual manila folders, which you can then label. And labeling can be alphabetically by surname. You can label each folder with a different surname. Some genealogists use a marriage unit, married couple and their children. Some people do it by record type, census, the birth records, birth certificates, or for example, probate records. And then other people do it by location. If you've got, one family in the Midwest settled in one county and another family, large family settled in another county, you may want to do it by location. Again, it's whatever works for you, the way you think your learning style. For example, I use in the past have used manila folders. I know some people who are more visual, and so they use colored folders. They still label them, but each surname, for example, has a specific color. I have seen systems where people use hanging folders. And this is actually, if I was starting from scratch today, with paper, I might go with this system, because what I can do is label this with a surname, each one with a different surname, and then I can subdivide this with my manila folders. So to me, that would, if I was starting with all over again with folders, I would go that way. Some people use these boxes that we see in libraries for holding magazines and pamphlets. They use them like you would the hanging folder. You give each surname gets a box, and then you can subdivide your box with folders. Okay, so as an example, if I were using manila folders, here are my 4 surnames of my grandparents. And then I would take the Brookman folder and subdivide that either by using pieces of paper with a tab on it, or the dividers that we used to use in our loose leaf notebooks in high school, subdivide it that way to each of the children. And then I could put all of David's papers in one section, Gertrude's, Herman's, and Max's. Another way to do it could be to subdivide by record. Instead of subdividing by the children's names, I could put all the birth certificates together under Brookman, all the census documents together, death, marriage, ship manifest, etc. So again, it just depends upon what your preference is. Okay. Other people, instead of using folders, use binders. And quite honestly, I've started switching out of folders into binders. It is recommended, if you use binders, to use D-ring binders. Instead of being a semicircle, this has got the straight edge, so it's called a D-ring binder, because the papers will lie better in the binder. The other thing is you don't stand your binders up, because the weight drags down on the papers. You lay them on their side. The binder system, I think yep. You would label the binders as you would your folders. If you're labeling if you're using surnames, have a binder for each individual surname. That's what I've done. Or if you're using locations, label them by locations or document type. and use dividers or tabs to subdivide the binder by name or document type. I put all of my papers that I put into the binders, I put them all in sheet protectors. These are copies, but I still like to have them in sheet protectors so I don't have to worry about the holes tearing. Usually a pedigree chart is included in the binder and a family group sheet. This is an example from a blog on using binders, and there is a resource sheet that I believe you'll be sent, so you don't have to worry about writing down any URLs. In this blogger explained how he put a family tree or pedigree chart in the front of his binder, and then he put a family group sheet. And I don't know if you can see it depending upon how your screen is set up, but he used tabs to separate the different parts, the different areas of the binder. I put all my originals, like the letters that my grandfather sent, or my parents' marriage certificate, license. Since they're originals, I store them separately. I put them in archival quality storage. I have a box that looks like this. It's called a binder box or a box album. It has the D-rings. It's lined with acid-free paper. Everything goes in a sheet protector. The sheet protectors, the ones you should use are made up of either polyester, polypropylene, or polyethylene. The difference in the three is the clarity of the protector, how well you can see through it. You should not use a sheet protector that is made with PVC, polyvinyl chloride, because the ink from the document may actually stick to the sheet protector. In the handout, I've included some, I've recommended some archival supply houses. I use Gaylord, but there are other ones, and you can get these things on Amazon also. These are a little pricey. They run about $40, $50. So I have one, and I use it to store my original documents, and the copies go in the binders. Okay, so I think that was a quick review of your paper files. Now, digital files. The organization for your digital files should basically mirror whatever you do for your paper files. Many of us may have a desktop that is cluttered and looks like this. Some of us, the desktop, you can see the clouds without any problems, or may have a document folder that looks, it's got some subfolders, and then it's got a lot of documents, separate documents, or it may look like this with folders and lots of documents that really should be placed into the folders. And I apologize to Mac people, but I'm a PC person, so this may look different on a Mac. So the system I use I have in my documents folder, I have a folder that I call Family History, and that is broken down into subfolders. Again, if I went with my 4 surnames, I would have Bagno, Druckmann, Korber, and Weistrop. And let's use Druckmann as an example. If I would then have a subfolder, if I opened up Druckmann, I would have subfolders for the 4 children. And then if I went to Sam, I would have subfolders under Sam. And the way I do it is I put all the census records for Sam together, all the naturalization papers for Sam together. So that's one way to do it. Now, within my family history folder, I have more folders than just the surnames. I have other folders. For example, I have one for education. So whenever I listen to a webinar, if there's a handout, a syllabus, or any handout, I put it into my education folders. Last month, I believe it was, newspapers.com was free for a weekend. So I spent the weekend finding relevant newspaper articles, downloaded them and put them in here. Eventually, I will probably distribute them among the proper surname. So I have more than just the surnames in my family history folder. The other way to do it, if you didn't want to do it by surnames, another way would be to do it the files by the topic. So the type of document. So I have census, death certificates, manifest marriage, and again, the newspapers and education. And this one, I happen to have a folder for Sanborn maps. Last summer, I spent a lot of time researching Sanborn maps for New York City. So I put them all in a folder. So here, start with family history. It's in my documents folder. I break this one down and I look at the census subfolder. Within that one, I have the New York City census folder, because New York City had an off year. Every 5 years, they would do a census in the early 1900s. And I have another folder for the 1940 census. If I open this one, that one then is divided up into the actual documents, and I have the different 1940 censuses for various people that I'm interested in. Okay, the last thing is spreadsheets or tables. I have started using spreadsheets more in my research. And as I go to some of the conferences, I'm starting to hear presentations more on using spreadsheets for organizing things. And spreadsheets are available through Excel. If you don't have Excel, you could use Google Sheets. There are some online spreadsheets that are available for free. But if you're don't like spreadsheets, you could do the same thing with a table. You can make a table for your computer, or if you don't like using your computer, you could just make a table in a notebook. The benefit of using spreadsheets is, for one thing, it helps you can keep a log of your completed work. You can keep a to-do list, and I'll show an example. What I very often do is, if I write something down after I listen to a talk that I want to remember to do, rather than writing it on a Post-it note that I'm going to lose, I put it into a spreadsheet. I also find that I'm using them to organize my data. Some people use them for timelines, or you can organize your different record types. And I've seen cases where people have been using Excel to actually make family trees. I have not tried that yet. So this is an example of a log, and this actually comes from Thomas McKinty, who is a professional genealogist. He's has a website here where he has a lot of what he calls genealogy cheat sheets, and they're for free. He set this up, so he's got the date, what he's trying to find out, his proof point, the record he found, where he found it, and the record type, and he includes his citations and then other information. So that's one thing you could do easily with a spreadsheet, and it's good for tracking what you've done. This is a part of my to-do list, and what I've done, again, I write something down on a piece of paper, then I go back and I put it in here, and it's not very fancy, but it tells me if I've completed something, I'll mark it here and the date that I've completed. Again, it helps me so I don't go back and repeat things, and it also reminds me when I get time what I can have to go back and do. And another way I've used it is for organizing some of my data. So this is a list of my translations. I have gotten a lot of scans from Poland, and I put things like the person's name, where I have filed it on my computer. All these documents have numbers in the Polish, it's the number in the Polish book, whether it's birth, marriage, or death, the year, and more information. The most important information is whether or not I've translated it, had it translated. So I don't have to go back looking through all my translations to find it. All I have to do is look here. And then some information that's like the family names that I might have pulled from it. I've also done this with marriage license information. I've got, every person that I'm researching, or is it somehow tied to my family, I've put this, the dates of their marriage and the place, and if there's a license number, the license number, and I've put it into a spreadsheet, and it's very helpful because it tells me what I'm missing and where I have to continue my research. So that was a quick screen sharing. Okay, that was a quick view of organizing your files, and I think Jay will start.
I guess it helps if I unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And Jessie, I found that very interesting myself and got some ideas, particularly about the bad things I've been doing with some of the original records, because I've never gotten around to actually getting them filed and stored properly. So got to add that to my do list.
Thank you.
So I'm going to talk about storing things electronically, mostly using individual computer programs. And by the way, I have my camera not only turned off, but removed because it normally sits right in the middle of my screen, and then I can't see what I'm doing. So what I want to cover is why you would want to use computer software or online software, and what your options are for where to have your data stored. And then the bulk of the talk will actually focus on the general functions of a software program, all of the kinds of things it can do for you. Very briefly, how to choose a program, where to get information about it. And then the other major part of the talk is about the program called Roots Magic, which is my favorite. And I've had a number of different programs, and I currently own more than one. And I'll take you through some of its detailed features so you get a more specific idea of how these things work. So of course, before computers became widespread and powerful, all information was saved on paper. And then it was extremely critical to have a suitable paper filing system. You do still need that, certainly, for original documents and photographs. But I think for most everything else, you can probably get away with just storing things electronically. I suppose the only slight disadvantage of that is that some people enjoy handling paper, seeing things on paper. If you were going on a visit to some people, maybe older people, they would rather not look at things on a computer screen. But otherwise, a computer does a terrific job of storing genealogical data. So opinions vary on where the data should be stored, and those opinions change over time. One option is to keep everything on your own computer, and I used to be a very strong believer in that because I wanted total control over that data. I didn't want somebody else to be able to decide what to do with it. Another possibility is to use one of the web services. You can have your tree up on Ancestry, MyHeritage, Family Search, Genie, possibly even some other places. These are the major ones. I personally have a tree on Ancestry and MyHeritage, and somebody else created a tree of my family on Genie. A third possibility always existed to some extent, but has become particularly viable. Option 3 is to use a combination of a web service and your own computer program. And that's basically how I am now doing things. So the advantage of keeping the data on your own computer, as I mentioned, is privacy. No one else can access it without your permission. I also do not like to put living people up on the web trees. The web services will typically try to protect information about living people by not showing their names and their dates, but there could always be a glitch at Ancestry or MyHeritage where the data gets released. And in fact, MyHeritage, I know, had one breach in which trees got, I think it was trees, but anyway, their system was hacked and somebody got a hold of things. So living people I put on my own personal tree. I would never put my children and grandchildren up on the ancestry tree. But I bent that rule a little bit. When I find a living person in a public record, I will add them to the online tree because other people could have found out who those people were. There is security, which is partly related to that privacy, that there's relatively little risk of unauthorized access. And there's also no risk of losing the data when perhaps the company changes its policy or even decides to go out of business. And suddenly your data's gone. You may have tried to collect it, and they will probably try to help you download your data, but there is a risk that you could lose it if you've entrusted it only to somebody else. And I think a bigger issue is that when it's on your own computer, the software programs give you much more control over how you display the data and how you can use and access it. On a web server, and again, I've mentioned the 4 main sites, you have some real advantages. First of all, your tree is often combined with the research tools. Ancestry was originally a place where you would do research, also family search and MyHeritage. Genie is only trees, but the other 3 have lots of documents. And there's a real advantage these days of putting trees up on those services. By the way, I will talk mainly about Ancestry, and most of my examples will be there. That's where I do most of my work. So here on the right is a piece of one of my trees. And even if you don't have a tree up there, you may have seen the ads on TV that show these little green leaves that appear next to a person. When you click on the person, you get this window, and it tells me that this person, for example, Emmanuel Noy, there's one ancestry hint. And if I click on that blue ancestry hint button, it will open another window and I can look at the information that Ancestry has found for me in the background without any work on my part. A little tip, I would suggest that rather than just clicking on it, you right click it or whatever it is on a Mac that's equivalent and open it in a new window or a new tab so that you don't lose your tree and can easily get back to it. These services have gotten incredibly good recently at finding data for you. And my experience is that at least 95% of the time, the hints that Ancestry finds are correct hints. Those are real documents about the person. So what might happen, for example, is newspapers.com gets a new newspaper. My family's from Minneapolis. They suddenly get the Minneapolis newspaper. It's now digitized. It's automatically indexed. And bingo, leaves pop up all over my tree because these newspaper articles are there. I don't have to search for them. In fact, I cannot any longer keep up with what Ancestry finds for me automatically. So every once in a while, I'll take a break for an evening and spend 3-4 hours, often into the early hours of the morning, catching up with all of these green leaves. In fact, you'll see in almost all my examples, there are green leaves that I have yet to get to. Another advantage of having a tree up on a web service is that you can share it with family members. You can either direct them to it and they can see it, or you can actually give them access to it so they can see even living people who are there. And if you want to, you can even give them rights to edit the data and to contribute to the tree. But the reason why I originally put trees up on Ancestry was that that tree might be discovered by other people, your unknown relatives, who go, let's say, to Ancestry, they do a search for your grandfather, and your tree comes up. And so they connect with you. For that reason, I didn't feel any point in putting my children and grandchildren up there, because my distant relatives are going to find me through my grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents, not my grandchildren. So this is a very powerful advantage of having a tree up online. Ancestry and MyHeritage also now offer DNA tests, and the DNA data can be linked to your tree, in which case, again, in the background, the service will go through and try to figure out who your matches are. So here's my one of my great grandmothers, and there's this little icon up here, and here's one of my great grandfathers on the other side of the family. And if you open up their file here, there's a thing down here on Ancestry called Through Lines, and if you click on that, it will show you the people who match. And if you click on those people, they will actually bring up a tree that's a composite of your tree and the other person's tree, in which you can see exactly how you're related. And I have found a number of relatives that way, where Ancestry has very nicely linked me up to them. Disadvantage is on the web service, you have a limited amount of control over how your tree is displayed. On Ancestry, you get the two views here. You can either see it as a kind of pedigree chart, or you can see it as this kind of mixed tree that shows both ancestors and descendants, but you have relatively little control over it. If you can see these, it means that this gene light has more family data than what you're seeing here. And if you click on that, the tree display will change to include her parents and children and so on. But beyond that, there's not much you can do. And in particular, for instance, Milton Feinberg is coming from another part of the tree, and it's impinging upon this part. So if I wanted to take a screenshot, I've got this extraneous data in it. Every once in a while with a complex tree, the display will even get garbled, and images will lie on top of each other. And you don't have that happen with your own software. So the third possibility is having your data, your tree, on both a computer and a web service. You get the best of both worlds. Both the computer software and the web services generally allow data to be exported and imported. And the old way of doing that was via a file type called GEDCOM. The disadvantage of that is it did not support all of the data that was typically stored in a computer program or in a web service. I saw that just the other day, a new standard, GEDCOM version 7, was announced, but I'm sure it is still not going to include everything. In particular, it has trouble in the past, and probably will continue, dealing with attached documents. The important new option that's come online in the last year or two is direct synchronization, which is now supported by a few programs. And I imagine there's going to be pressure on other ones to add it. Roots Magic, my favorite, and Family Tree Maker, my second favorite, synchronize with both Ancestry and Family Search trees. They do it in different ways. I won't go into that now. You can ask me if you're curious about it in the Q&A, but that's part of the reason why I have both of these programs. You'll see later they're cheap enough that if you're seriously interested in genealogy, the cost of the software is absolutely negligible. MyHeritage, one step better, that if you have their service, they offer a free program called Family Tree Builder, which synchronizes with the data that's on MyHeritage. So now let's look at the things you can do if you have a software program running on your own computer. It falls into these 4 categories, which I'll talk about in more detail in the subsequent slides. Obviously, it's used to record data. That means relationships, facts, which are things that don't have dates, events, which have a place and date. Sources, how you got the information. Media, pictures and other kinds of files. But it goes beyond that. It offers a lot of capability for analyzing the data. For example, to detect data that's missing or data that's possibly erroneous. It also provides tools for finding information, which, as you can imagine, could be quite challenging if you've got all your stuff on paper in folders and binders. It takes a long time to search through such things to find something, but the computer can find them very nicely for you. As Jessie mentioned, you can plan your research using a spreadsheet or on paper, but the genealogy programs will do that for you. They will record what you've already done and what you need to do. And well, they have very powerful tools for displaying the results. You can get information in lists, in box charts, in wall charts that you might want for a family reunion, and they can even generate automatically a website. So, recording data. It's nice that these programs can record complex relationships, such as cousins marrying cousins, or even brother-sisters marrying each other, not the brother marrying the sister, but two brothers marrying two sisters, and so on. Biological and adoptive parents, and even other relationships, godparents and witnesses. Witnesses is something that's relatively new and potentially very powerful. For example, if you have a naturalization document or a wedding certificate, you can literally record the witnesses who signed the documents and attested to them. You can also use that facility, for example, to record everybody who attended a wedding or everybody who came to a funeral, so that you can have a broader picture of the event. You're not limited to the standard set of facts and events and relationships. You can create your own, and you can record sources very accurately. You can use simple sources, and the software generally comes with templates for much more complex recording of sources. You can attach images, videos, sound files, documents, in fact, any kind of computer file. Analyzing the data. You can search in very powerful ways. I put up two screenshots here. The first one shows the searching in Roots Magic, its most advanced searching, in which you can set up a whole logical arrangement. So I wanted to find births that occurred in Minneapolis between 1910 and 1920. So I said birth date is after that, birth date is before that, and the birthplace contains the word Minneapolis. I click on the button, which is hidden under here, and it brings up a list of all of my people. It jumps immediately to the first match, and then I can scroll from match to match. I worked my way to this person, and you can see that indeed he was born in Minneapolis in that time period. So this can really help you find something that you don't know how to look for. You don't remember the name of the person, but you know where something happened and when it happened. The software will also automatically flag problems. So here is a piece of one of my pedigree chart in the display, and you see this little warning item up there. Tells me there is something in Wolf Scholem Rigler's information that doesn't make sense and needs to be investigated. You can click on that and it will bring it up, or you can manually run problem checks. So I ran one here and it listed the name and the problem found. So with this person, it says the parents married after the person's birth. And here's a second one. Well, you know, these days that happens a lot. It's perfectly legitimate, but it's probably a mistake for the older generation. Here's one for someone who got married after age 70. And by the way, you can tailor these. Now that one is okay, but when something like that happens, you might want to know about it so you can check out and make sure you really meant it. By the way, if these are valid, you can tell the software, don't show me this again, it's actually correct. Here's one that it picked up that is almost certainly a mistake. It is highly unlikely that Jacob Bessler was born to a mother who was only 12 years old. Maybe possible, but highly unlikely. That there's probably a mistake in that data, and I can now research that. The planning of your research, the software supports to-do lists and research logs. And the nice thing about them is that you can search them in any manner you choose. You could search, for example, what you need to do about a particular person. You could be making a trip, say in my case, to Minneapolis, and I'd like to know all of my to-do items that have something to do with Minneapolis, or even a specific repository. I'm going to be traveling to the National Archives and Records Administration building in Washington, where I have put into my to-do list some of the records that are only available there. So I can bring up that repository, see all the things that I need to do, and avoid the problem of returning home and realizing that I forgot to do something while I was there. You can also order them based on priority so that you spend your time working on the ones that are most important. You get to display your information in many, many ways. And this is one of the things that makes me love Roots Magic. The main screen lets you switch very quickly among different displays. So here's a pedigree display. Starts with one person, shows the parents' parents, and so on. You can very quickly switch between 5 generations and 6 generations. Alternatively, you can show descendants, starting with a given person, showing their wives, their children, their children's spouses, and so on down. And you get to, again, very quickly select how many generations you want to show. I often find that I start out with just 2, so I quickly see the children, can pick the right one, jump down, and then eventually display the whole tree. You can also show the family, in which case you see the mother and the father and mother and their parents and all of their children. And you can navigate with these arrows. It means that Philip Sage has some children, so you can switch to him, and so on. You can very quickly work through things. You can also do a people search here. And you can see the data about a person on a timeline. You can generate full-fledged reports. Here's an example of 2 ancestor pedigree charts. One is a basic text chart. You saw an example of that in Jessie's talk. You can also make fancier box charts, and you get to tailor exactly what kind of boxes, and you can color code them, and you can decide what information should be in them. A lot of capability. Whoops, mistake there. That was supposed to say box chart. You can make these cute kinds of things where it arranges photos of the people in a tree. This is very powerful. You can generate real wall charts, and these can be enormous. And today you can export the data from the charting software in the program to a company that will print it out for you, and they can print it up to 6 feet wide or high, and I think as long as you would like, but certainly up to 100 feet. So if you were having a family reunion of all of the descendants of your great-great-great-grandfather, you could make a chart that would be 40, 50 feet wide, however big the room is that you're going to display this, and just roll it out. In the old days when I did this, I had to print this on hundreds of sheets of paper and paste them, tape them together. You don't have to do it now, and they're cheap and they're beautiful color. And you can make many different kinds of wall charts too. You can also make a book report. And so the software is actually able to generate a book about your family or about a particular person's family. And you have a lot of power over that. So this is in the section narrative reports. You basically can do an ancestor only report or ancestors and children or various kinds of descendant charts. You can specify how many generations. You have lots of options, lay out what kinds of boxes, what fonts, and so on. And you click generate report and you get this enormous book that comes out of it. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. You can generate a timeline chart. And this was a very interesting one for me. In Jewish tradition, children are typically named, in Ashkenazi Jewish tradition, children are named only after deceased relatives. So here is my great-great-great-grandfather and his child, and his child, and his child, and his children. Okay? Now, the red arrow here shows that he was named after his great-grandfather. Wait a minute. 1, 2, great-grandfather. And you can see from the timeline that he was named after him just after he died. This one's even more interesting. By the way, it meant that knowing when my grandfather Benjamin was born, I already knew when Baruch Rigler had died. I knew that he had died by then and had not died by the birth of a previous child. So I had a narrow window. And that's illustrated here. My great-great-great-grandmother Charna. Here are 3 of her great-great-grandchildren. My mother's name in Hebrew is Charna. Faye, her older sister, was born 1 month before she died. So she was not named after her. My mother was the first child born who could be named after. Seeing things on timelines can actually be very helpful in your research. Here's a listing of all the list reports. A list of all the names and addresses for people and phone numbers, birthday and anniversary list, all the descendants, all the facts you have, any duplicates, and so on. Tremendous capability for analyzing and displaying your data. So how do you go about choosing a program? I'm not going to give you any specific links. If you want to find the programs, you can easily use Google or another search engine. But if you Google genealogy software, it will bring up a lot of pages that list the available software. And there are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of programs. I just caution people to be careful about trusting any of the evaluations you read. Because I remember I read one of the reviews of Roots Magic that said one of its downsides is it couldn't do XYZ. Well, of course it could do that. The person who did the review just didn't know how to do it. So you have to be a little bit careful. For Max, the leading choice had traditionally been Reunion. It's a superb program, but I would say that now that Roots Magic is available for Macintosh and Family Tree Maker is available for Macintosh, they're giving Reunion some real competition, because at the moment, Reunion does not synchronize with the online trees. Roots Magic and Family Tree Maker do. For Windows, the leading choices have long been Roots Magic and Family Tree Maker, and a number of people also like Legacy Family Tree. There are often either free or trial versions, so you can try them out without having to buy them, and some of them have apps that will run on your smartphone. So here's a little more detail. I decided to see how much these things cost. Roots Magic is only $30 for either the PC version or the Mac version. Family Tree Maker, again, for both, considerably more expensive, but still a negligible cost when you consider how much money you spend when you do genealogy research. Mac software tends always to be on the more expensive side. Reunion's about $100. Legacy Family Tree is PC only, $35. Roots Magic, Reunion, and Legacy Family Tree have free trial versions. I know in the case of Roots Magic, it is the full version with some limitations. If you decide to buy it, you put in the unlock code, and now the restrictions go away, but your data stays there. So you can feel free to use it in its trial mode and put in what you can. You will not lose your data and have to re-enter it. And I say they're cheap. It makes sense to buy more than one. I've had as many as three different programs. So now I'm going to show you a little bit more about how things look and work in Roots Magic. We're talking here about version 7. Version 8 will probably be out soon. It's been in the works now, I think, for 2 years. It is going to be a major revision. People are actually allowed to use it now. You can join up for their test program. I have declined to do that because I simply do not have time to mess with it until it actually comes out. It is going to be a quantum leap in performance, but it also looks a little bit different. It will do all the same things and it will do them better, but there'll be a little bit of a learning curve in going to version 8, but well worth it. So, for example, when you install it and you first open it, it will come up with this Welcome to Roots Magic page. Probably these things at the bottom wouldn't be there because you wouldn't have any trees to open, but it would let you create a new tree or possibly try to open an existing one if you had one. The ones down below are listed because I've already used them. Similarly, or equivalently, you can use the file menu where you get the same options and even more. So you click create a new file and it opens up this window for you to define that file. You give it a name and you tell it where to store it. It will default to someplace, but I recommend that you change that to something in a cloud folder. So I have Dropbox on my computer, which means I have a Dropbox folder. And by storing my data in that folder, which is also on my laptop, I can do work from either place. So I work at home on my main computer and put in all my data. Then I go off on a trip with my laptop and all the data is there. I can enter it in, get home, turn on my computer, the data's all there. You get to make a few other decisions here. Okay, so once you've done that, an empty tree opens up. You want to put in some new data. The easiest way is to click on Add a Person. The Add Person screen opens up. You put in the names, the sex, male, female, or unknown if you don't know, birth and death dates and places. You can enter dates in any format you like, and the program will convert them to the standard format that you specified in the previous screen. I want to point out this very important flag up here. If you put in a death date, the living checkbox will go away automatically. But if you enter a person and you know they have died, but you don't know their death information, be sure to unclick that. Because if you upload your tree, for example, to Family Tree DNA, the DNA test place, they will automatically prevent people from seeing anybody who's marked as living. And I've seen many trees, and it happened on my own tree, in fact, where somebody born in 1700 or 1800 is marked as living and you can't see them. So it's important to manually uncheck that if the person is known to be dead. When you put in the place, the software is often very helpful in trying to check it. So Roots Magic does county checks, not too important for recent history, but if you're putting in an ancestor from the 1700s, there's a good chance that your town was in a different county or might have even had a different name from what it has today. So the software helps with that. After you've entered it, then the person screen comes up. The dates have now been changed to the standard format. And there's a very powerful possibility here. I've selected birth. I look over here on the right, I've got the detailed data, and there's this little window next to the place. Click on that, and it looks up the place in a gazetteer and shows you the most likely matching places. And now I have not only that it's Minneapolis, Minnesota, United States, it is filled in the county. And today I try very hard to always follow the genealogical standard of including the county in this format. So it's very easy. I select that, paste it, close it, and now it will have the information there. Let's see. So if I want to add, I've got the birth and death. I want to add additional information. I click on Add Fact. I can add media, so image files and other things like that. I can add a note. I can add sources. I can do it down here, or I can do it by clicking in the boxes here. So you can see there are no check marks here, which means no notes have been added, no sources have been added, and no media have been added. So if I want to add a source, and I recommend that you never enter anything into the software without adding a note about the source of that information. Otherwise, you'll be very angry with yourself later when you get conflicting information and you cannot remember where the existing information came from, because it makes a big difference whether it came from a birth certificate or somebody's vague recollection of when the person was born. So by clicking on this, the source opened, I can add a new source. The easiest one to use is freeform, but you'll notice there are many, many templates. I've shown you a few useful ones down here: courthouse records, death certificates. So one of the important ones for me is the stuff that is my personal information. So I want to note that as the source for that data when it's just something I know from my own experience coming out of my own head. So I choose that, and I give it names and footnote formats. Click OK. And I've now entered that, forgotten that was for the birth. And if you're going to use it, for example, the death here uses the same source. Click Memorize, and Roots Magic remembers that source. So when that was the death, I can now click on the birth and simply paste that in. So it makes it much easier to enter the same source for a lot of the stuff. For example, you find a census entry. That is a source for everybody in the household. So you'll want to enter that and then go from person to person, everybody in the household, and attach it to that census record. And now there it is, pasting it. There are many, many kinds of additional facts that you can add. I'm going to give you an example of adding my father's occupation. So I pick that and select it. But notice here, I'm not sure I'm going to get back to that. You can also define your own custom fact. The software, for example, does not come with a fact type called Hebrew name, but that's something I need often because Jews have Hebrew names usually. And I can create that fact on my own and then use it. So I'm going to select occupation. It brings up the screen over here for it. Put in a date if it had a date, his occupation didn't have any specific date. You can put in a place if it's associated with a place. You can also put in place details. So for example, the place might have been Minneapolis, but the detail could be the name of the company where he was working. The description is that he was a physical chemist. It doesn't have a date, but maybe I don't want it to be at the end here, where it looks as though he had the occupation after he died. You can put in a sort date that will simply tell the software where to list it on the screen. You can record whether that is a fact that has been proven or disproven or disputed. And you can also check private if this is sensitive information that you might not want to include in the exported data or in reports that you're going to share with relatives. And then at the bottom, it shows you that the sentence that the software would generate based upon the information that I've entered. It will simply say, Charles Sage was a physical chemist. In this case, it's fine. And that's what would appear in a book report. But suppose I don't really know that he was a physical chemist. It is said that he was a physical chemist. I can click on Customize Sentence, and then I can modify it from the standard so that it would say, Charles Sage, according to his nephew, was a physical chemist. That way, when you generate a book, you don't have to every single time go through it and make these changes. The software will remember it so that after you've done some editing, you can generate an updated book. I have not used that very much, but especially professional genealogists who want to turn out a real book, and probably many others who would like to distribute a book to their relatives can do that. Now you need to add more people. You can just click on these boxes to add the parents of that person. There's add up here. You can add an individual, a spouse, parents, or child. You have a toolbar that can do the same thing. This toolbar is like that. It has a pull down. I have individual toolbars here for adding parents, spouse, and children. The toolbar is customizable. You can decide which icons you want to include or omit. Very flexible and powerful and easy to use. So, interesting, I forgot to update this one. When we've done this before in our course that Jessie and I teach, we follow this with a workshop in which the students actually use it. And I now have in this deck of slides lots of detailed examples, another 50 slides or something. We're not going to do those, but they are there, and in the handout that will be distributed to you or may have been distributed, there's a link. All of my slides are up on my website, and you don't need to write this down because it'll be in the handout, but if you go to brookline.sagefamily.org, you can download the slides or view them on your screen. So this goes through all this. So I think I am done for the moment. We should have a Q&A. Stop sharing.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jay, and thank you, Jessie. That was fabulous. We do have some questions already in the chat, so we'll start with those. And Jay, I think several of them have to do with your suggestion to be using more than one type of software at a time. So I don't know if you can see them in the chat, or do you want me to read them? I'll read them so everyone hears.
Yeah.
So first of all, Lois asks, why do you use more than one at a time?
Okay. The first time I did it, it was because Roots Magic lacked a particular chart that I wanted to use for a reunion. I was going to make badges that everyone would wear that would show the patriarch of the family and then lines going down to show how the person wearing that badge descended, how they descended from that person. And that report was available in Family Tree Maker. So I bought Family Tree Maker. I took a GEDCOM of my data from Roots Magic, imported it into Family Tree Maker, printed out all those badges, and we held our reunion. What I'm doing now, I mentioned earlier that there's a slightly different way in which Roots Magic and Family Tree Maker synchronize with Ancestry and the other sites. Roots Magic does it in the way that is a purist genealogist I want to do. Family Tree Maker and the free program from MyHeritage just sync everything totally. You make a change on the website, it appears on your computer. Make a change on your computer, it appears on the website. I can't use that with my main genealogy software because, as I told you, I have my children and grandchildren on my own copy. I don't want that to automatically go up to Ancestry. On the other hand, it's very handy to have Family Tree Maker constantly updating everything from Ancestry. So on my own computer, I always have totally up-to-date versions of all of my trees. I have many, many trees on Ancestry, and they're all kept synchronized at all times. Whereas if I make a few changes and then tried to use Roots Magic to do it, I'd have to go through every single change and either accept it or not accept it and tell it, should I take the version on my computer and upload it to Ancestry, or should I download it from Ancestry to my computer? I actually do this in Roots Magic as well. I just create a new tree. So I have a tree called Ancestry Tree, and I do a full sync because it's empty on my computer initially, and then I just synchronize it with Ancestry, and of course it downloads everything because it all goes to get started. And periodically I just delete the tree and start from scratch. So those are two reasons why you might have different versions.
Okay, great, thank you. I think you actually may have answered some of the other related questions in that answer, but I'll just read them out to be sure. So a question about whether Ancestry data can be exported in order to be imported to Roots Magic or Family Tree Maker. If you have a tree on reunion, do you use GEDCOM to transfer to Roots Magic, or do you need to start a new tree?
No, you can always use GEDmatch. I haven't seen any software that doesn't use a GEDCOM file. Not GEDmatch, a GEDCOM file. All of the software will export or import the data in the GEDCOM format, but it means it doesn't get everything. And in particular, it doesn't get all the associated files, images, videos, and so on. Whereas the direct synchronization gets everything. So I have on my local computer all of the images of the material from Ancestry, the census images, the documents that Ancestry has, and so on.
Okay, great. Okay, along the same lines, if you have two software programs and you update one, do you update the other manually?
Well, as I said, I have multiple ones, but I only input my own data to Roots Magic in a particular tree, my private tree. The others are all come from the web service and get synchronized down.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be a big problem to try to keep two pieces of software. So in my first example, if I found that I needed a report that was only available in some other program, that's when I would export a GEDCOM, import it to the other program to generate my report, and then I'm done. I would throw away that data after that.
Okay, and then finally, on this topic, if you have a full tree on Family Tree Maker and want to upload on Ancestry, is it possible to edit children and grandchildren's upload?
You mean to choose who gets synchronized?
Yeah, Joan, if you want to clarify.
Well, you have no choice. If you synchronize with Family Tree Maker, what you have locally and what you have in Ancestry is the same. You cannot have mismatches. The software will automatically copy things back and forth.
Great, thank you. Okay, so question from Sue. Jay, do these programs have places for things like great-grandpa Jake was a blonde, or family story says Grandpa X was one of first settlers of such and such place?
Absolutely.
Hearsay, in other words.
Absolutely. Those, the ones that were just mentioned, those are standard type facts. One of them would be called anecdote, where you can write anything you want. There is one for personal characteristics, physical characteristics. And if there isn't, you just make your own. You could make a fact type called hair color and put in hair colors for people, just as I put in Hebrew names for people. There's really no limit. And I believe you can even create your own relationships between people. I haven't had any reason to do that. I suppose there was a time when it was the only way to enter a same-sex marriage, but I think most of the software, and I think even Family Search, the software has bent with the times and now allows some things that wouldn't have been allowed before. Although that raises an interesting point I should make. There's a distinction between family history and genealogy. Strictly speaking, genealogy is about genes. And so, in a way, marriage has nothing to do with that. Children have a biological mother and a biological father. And strict genealogy records those biological relationships as primary. It may record other things like marriages, but it's strictly genealogy. There's no such thing as two women having a child biologically so far.
Okay. Question from Lawrence. How would Roots Magic display a married couple who are first cousins?
Well, they would just display them as a married couple. And as you saw the tree going up, it would take me too long to bring it up, but I have my mother's sister, Wriggler, married a Halpern, and that Halpern was the son of a Halpern and a Wriggler. And that Halpern father was the son of a Halpern and a Wriggler. It was 3 cousin marriages in a row. So when I look at their pedigree chart and I see the great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents up there, the same names appear over and over. But it doesn't cause any problem in the display. It's just the same person is in multiple places. I think on Ancestry, it makes a mess. And my father's grandfather married 2 sisters. One died and he married the sister. And Ancestry has a very difficult time displaying that tree correctly. It just gets all messed up. But the computer software has no problems.
All right. In paper genealogy, I used to put things I had found evidence for in ink and things I was pretty sure of in pencil. Is there anything similar in any of these programs?
Well, as you saw, you could mark a fact as proved or disproved or disputed, and you can write anything you want in the notes. And I'll have to confess that in a number of cases, I'm in such a hurry that I actually don't have time to go in and make a proper source. So I will just open the note area and say, I got this from the death certificate, blah, blah, blah. So in the note field, you can write anything you want, just as a reminder to yourself about the situation, either with that fact or with that person.
Am I correct in thinking, this is me speaking for myself, am I correct in thinking that those to-do type options would also maybe be useful for things that you were still seeking evidence for?
Yeah, so you could write into your to-do list that you need to research, let's say, the death of your great-grandfather. And you could say there it's because they're family stories that he died in 1912, or 1914, which is it? So that's on your list. And maybe you know they agree that he died in Minneapolis. So you put down Minneapolis. So the next time you make a trip to Minneapolis, you know, oh, I better go to an archive there to try to dig this out. Go to the local newspaper and go through their archives, or go to their historical library or something like that.
Okay, great. Deborah, I see your question in the chat. I'm interested in the gallery function on Ancestry. Is there a way to attach an image directly to a person's profile?
Yes.
How do you do that? Like I have found on newspapers and the marriage license application of my grandmother and grandfather. And I've put it in the gallery. So how do I put it into their profile or in his or her profile?
When I've done it, I open up their profile.
Yes.
Click on the media tab, and then I upload the media. So for instance, I've uploaded photographs of people.
Yes.
And that goes into their media library, not a general media library. It's associated with a person.
And then does it show in their profile, like as their life events?
Well, in the case of a photo, you can make that the profile photo, which appears whenever you are looking at them. And you saw some of my people had photos. And you can control that. You can associate it with a fact, and it'll appear with that fact. It won't automatically, as I recall. By the way, the nice thing when you're working with the genealogy software, suppose that I capture an image of a census record of a couple with 7 children.
Mm-hmm.
That's 9 people.
Mm-hmm.
I can take that image and attach it to all of them very easily. The image exists only once on my computer, but it's attached to all of them. So any given thing can be associated with multiple people, whereas in a paper filing system, you'd have to make 7 copies of it and put it in 7 different folders, one for each of the people. So there's a lot of advantage to having things on the computer. You also don't really need a filing system to organize them, because they could all be in one folder and the software keeps track of that. You open up a person, you can see all of the images associated with them. You don't really care where they are on your computer, because you can open them up in the software and see all of the images and click on one and it fills your screen. You don't really need to know where it is, because you don't have to find it yourself. You're muted.
We have another question, and I think this may have to be our last. Kathy, if we have time, I'll get back to yours. But Kay wonders, how would a person who who identifies as non-binary be entered?
I don't know. I mean, you in the software I'm aware of, you can either put them in as male or female or unknown. I don't believe you can create another category, but you probably could create another fact type where you could write in whatever you want, or you could put that in as a note. You put them in as unknown and include in the note whatever the issue is. And again, that's the distinction between the biological genealogy and the family history, which takes into account how people feel about themselves, because generally, biologically, the sex is determined. There's either a Y chromosome or not, and determines whether it's male or female, regardless of how the person feels. Although I'm not an expert on that, there may be cases where even biologically, genetically, there's some question. So I haven't seen that. That may be something that comes in the future. As I say, they didn't used to allow a marriage to have 2 men or 2 women. But obviously a lot of people want to record that, because we have same-sex marriage now, and so you want to put it in your software. And so the programs now allow. There used to be, if you picked a woman and then you said spouse, you could not change the sex of that other person. So I actually have one of my cousins, a woman, married a woman, and I had to enter that other woman as a man. This was many, many years ago. I could probably go back and fix that now. But her picture made it pretty clear that she wasn't a man. And that's how I lived with that problem.
Okay. Okay, so Kathy just wants to clarify her earlier question. Can all fact data on Ancestry.com, including custom events, be exported in order to import to other software? Is there a list of data pieces that are synced?
I don't think that Ancestry.com allows custom facts. I've never tried that, and to tell you the truth, I've never gone the other direction from my local computer to Ancestry to see what happens when, for example, I've created Hebrew name. Would that end up going up to Ancestry or not? I don't know. That's an interesting question. I'll have to find out.
Okay, great. And we'll make this for real, the last question from Barry. Would I be correct in stating that almost any of what is input into Roots Magic and Family Tree can be input into Ancestry or Family Research? That these software programs' only advantage is charts, lists, and reports?